The signal came without warning, cutting through the static of deep space like a whisper in the dark. It was faint, broken, and almost lost among thousands of meaningless radio bursts that filled the cosmos every second. On board the Terran listening post Vigil 9, stationed near the edge of the Orion Spur, technician Leon Carter nearly ignored it. It looked like another natural pulse from a dying star, but something about the rhythm caught her attention. It wasn't random. It was language. She isolated the signal and played it through the comm speakers. The voice was strange, soft, trembling, and filled with desperation. It repeated a short message over and over again, distorted but clear enough to understand one word: help. For most of the galaxy, a call like that would be routine background noise. Distress signals were common, especially from scavengers or smugglers. But this one came from the Perseus Arm, a region that no one wanted to visit. Pirates, radiation storms, and unexplored ruins made it a dangerous wasteland. The Galactic Council had long ago marked it as a low-value zone. No trade, no patrols, no reason to go there. Still, Leon's curiosity got the better of her. She cleaned the signal and traced its origin. The coordinates pointed to a dead system called Thraxon 4, known only from old survey maps. The data showed no life, no habitable planets, and no trade routes. Yet the distress call was still active, echoing like a cry from a ghost. She sent the findings to her supervisor, who frowned, sighed, and said, "Tag it as non-priority. Council won't waste fuel on ghost stories." That should have been the end of it, but Leon didn't erase it. She uploaded the raw data into the Open Terran Response Network, a database that independent rescue teams sometimes scanned for unapproved signals. And that's where it was found hours later by a small crew of Deathworlders. The Deathworlder Response Corps was not an official organization. They were volunteers, former soldiers, explorers, and engineers who couldn't stand sitting back while the Council ignored cries for help. They were human, which meant they came from Earth, a planet so harsh it had trained its children to survive anything. The galaxy called them Deathworlders because their home was violent, unpredictable, and deadly by most alien standards. Humans wore the name with pride. Commander Ira Holt led one such crew aboard the ship Resolute Dawn. When her navigator forwarded the data from Vigil 9, she didn't hesitate. The message's weak encryption, the energy pattern. It wasn't faked. Someone out there was dying, and no one else was coming. "Plot a course to Thraxon 4, Holt ordered. Her officers exchanged uneasy glances. The Perseus Arm was far beyond supply lines. The area was infamous for ambushes. Even advanced ships had vanished there without a trace. But none of them questioned her. Deathworlders didn't leave distress calls unanswered. As the Resolute Dawn jumped through hyperspace, the crew tried to decode more of the message. After filtering hours of noise, they recovered fragments of words, strange syllables that sounded melodic, almost musical. A linguistics AI identified it as a non-human dialect, unregistered in any database. That meant only one thing: first contact. Commander Holt stared at the holographic star map, watching their destination glow faintly red. "A new species," she murmured, "and the first thing we hear from them is a cry for help." The journey took 37 standard hours. When the ship emerged from hyperspace, the crew fell silent. Before them floated the remains of a battle. A shattered moon orbited the main planet, its crust split apart by impact scars. Wreckage drifted everywhere. Broken ships, metallic shards, and bodies frozen in the vacuum. The distress signal was still transmitting, coming from a single damaged space station that barely held power. Lieutenant Vega reported life signs: weak, scattered. The station's core reactor was failing. They had minutes before total collapse. Commander Holt ordered immediate docking. The crew moved fast, suiting up and entering the airlock. Inside, the corridors were filled with smoke, floating debris, and flickering emergency lights. The walls were covered in strange iridescent symbols. The air smelled of burnt ozone and blood. Then they saw the survivors. They were small, delicate beings with silver-blue skin and translucent fins along their arms. Their eyes were large and glassy, shimmering like liquid. They looked fragile, as if the slightest touch could break them. One of them tried to speak, but the words were broken by pain. The translator struggled to catch meaning, but a few phrases emerged. "Attack Koth Dominion. No defense. Please." The Thraxon, as they later called themselves, were a peaceful race. They had built a civilization based on harmony and art, not war. They had no armies, no weapons, When the Koth fleet came, a brutal empire of conquerors and raiders, the Thraxan had only one choice: send a message into the void and hope someone, anyone, would answer. The Deathworlders listened in silence. Some of them clenched their fists. Others lowered their eyes. Commander Holt looked at the survivors, beings who could barely stand, trembling under the weight of terror, and made a decision. "Get them aboard the Resolute Dawn," she said. "All of them. We're not leaving anyone behind." The evacuation was chaos. Explosions rocked the station as the reactor destabilized. One section collapsed before they could reach it. Holt herself carried 2 Thraxan children to safety, her armor shielding them from debris. When the last shuttle detached, the station erupted in a silent bloom of fire, scattering fragments into the dark. Back on the ship, medical teams worked around the clock. The Thraxan were malnourished, dehydrated, and terrified. Many had never seen war before. Through the translator, one survivor, an elder named Ralith, explained that their world had been attacked without warning. The Koth Dominion wanted their energy crystals, which powered their cities. When the Thraxan refused to surrender, the Koth bombarded them from orbit. "Why did you call for help?" Holt asked gently during the debrief. "You didn't know if anyone would hear." Ralith looked at her with tired eyes. "Because we had to believe someone still listens." Those words struck everyone in the room. Humanity had been ignored by the Galactic Council too, once upon a time. They knew what it felt like to cry into the void and get only silence in return. Holt turned to her officers. "Send a message to the Council," she said. "Tell them we found survivors. Tell them we need support." The reply came hours later. "Do not engage. Evacuate if possible. The Koth Dominion's movements are politically sensitive." It was a coward's order wrapped in polite words. The Council didn't want to risk war. They preferred to pretend the Thraxan didn't exist. Holt read the message twice, then deleted it. "We're Deathworlders," she said quietly. "We don't abandon people to monsters," her crew agreed. They would stay. They would fight if needed. The galaxy might call them reckless, dangerous, or uncivilized. But when others turned away, humans ran toward the fire. Outside, the broken moon glowed faintly as the Resolute Dawn powered its weapons. In the distance, long-range scanners detected movement, the Koth fleet returning to finish what they started. And for the first time since the Thraxan sent their desperate message, they saw something they had thought lost forever: hope. The Deathworlders had heard them. And they had answered. When the human ship Resolute Dawn entered the Thraxan system, the sight before them looked like a nightmare frozen in time. The planet that had once been green and bright was now covered in scars of black smoke. Entire cities were burning even from orbit, and massive craters glowed red along the surface. The sky shimmered with the remains of orbital stations that had fallen apart. Every sensor reading screamed destruction. Commander Era Holt stood on the bridge staring at the ruined world in silence. Around her, the crew worked quickly, scanning for survivors. Faint life signals flickered across the planet's shadowed side. Maybe hundreds, maybe thousands. But even from space, it was clear that the Thraxan civilization was finished. The Thraxan who had survived on the space station told them about the attack. Their people had lived in peace for thousands of years. They were artists, healers, and builders. Their cities floated on oceans of crystal water, powered by energy crystals that glowed like living stars. They had no weapons, no armies, and no reason to believe anyone would ever harm them. Then the Koth Dominion arrived. The Koth were a race of massive reptilian warriors with cold, glassy eyes and a thirst for conquest. To them, the Thraxan's world was a treasure chest waiting to be taken. The Koth demanded surrender. When the Thraxan refused, the Koth answered with fire. Commander Holt felt rage build in her chest as she listened to the survivors. She had seen war before. She had seen what empires did when no one stopped them. But this was cruelty beyond reason. The Thraxan weren't soldiers. They were dreamers. The Koth hadn't fought a war. They had committed a slaughter. Lieutenant Vega reported that a Koth fleet was still in the system. Smaller ships were scavenging debris, collecting what was left of the Thraxan's technology. Holt ordered the Resolute Dawn into stealth mode and moved closer. The human ship's advanced cloaking field blended it with the cold background of space. Through the observation deck, the crew watched the enemy. Koth vessels were huge, like floating fortresses made of dark metal. Their hulls were covered in scars and glowing red patterns that looked almost alive. They moved in tight formations, efficient and confident. The humans could see the arrogance in every maneuver. One of the Thraxan survivors, the elder named Ralith, stood beside Commander Holt. His face was pale, his eyes full of sorrow. "They are collecting our children," he whispered. Holt looked at the sensor data, life readings inside the Koth cargo holds. The numbers matched. The Koth were taking prisoners. Something inside Holt snapped. "They're not leaving this system," she said coldly. But the situation was complicated. The Resolute Dawn was powerful, yes, but it was only one ship. The Koth fleet had at least 24 war cruisers. To fight them directly would mean suicide, and yet retreating felt impossible. The humans had answered the Thraxans' call for help. To turn back now would make them no better than the council that ignored them. Holt called a meeting with her senior officers in the war room. The air was thick with tension. "The council ordered us not to interfere," Vega reminded her. "If we fire on the Koth, we'll be breaking every treaty in the book." "Then we break it," Holt replied without hesitation. Treaties didn't save the Thraxan. Laws didn't stop the slaughter. Maybe it's time someone did. The crew exchanged glances. They all knew what this meant. Defying the Galactic Council could brand them as outlaws, even terrorists. But none of them cared. These were Deathworlders, people raised on a planet where survival demanded courage and unity. To them, moral duty meant more than politics. Meanwhile, aboard one of the Koth command ships, the enemy admiral prepared his next attack. His name was Vorak Tul, and his reputation was known across 3 sectors. He had crushed dozens of worlds and enslaved entire species. To him, the Thraxan were just another conquest. He didn't even consider them a threat. When his scanners picked up a faint energy trace that didn't belong, he dismissed it as debris. He didn't know that the faint trace was the Resolute Dawn, silently watching. Holt ordered a covert rescue mission. Under cover of darkness, 2 stealth shuttles left the human ship and slipped through the debris field. Their goal was to reach one of the Koth cargo ships and free any Thraxan prisoners inside. The mission was dangerous. If detected, they would be vaporized instantly. The shuttles moved like shadows. Inside one, Sergeant Malik led a team of Marines. He was a huge man with scars across his arms and a calm voice that carried confidence. As the shuttle attached itself to the enemy hull, he turned to his team. "Remember," he said, "we're here to save lives, not start a war. But if they get in our way, we finish it," one of the Marines replied. They cut through the Koth hull and entered the ship. Inside, the corridors were dim and smelled of oil and metal. The air was hot and heavy. The Koth crew moved slowly, unaware that humans were among them. Malik's team moved like ghosts, using silenced weapons and shock rounds that paralyzed targets without sound. In the cargo bay, they found the prisoners. Dozens of Thraxan huddled in cages, weak and frightened. Some were too injured to stand. The Marines opened the cages and guided them out quietly. Then a young Thraxan child pointed at a nearby door, trembling. "More! In there!" Malik opened the door and then came face to face with a Koth guard. For a moment, both froze. Then instinct took over. Malik fired once, the shock round hitting the guard square in the chest. The Koth dropped silently. But the noise had triggered an alarm. Red lights flashed through the corridor. "Extraction, now!" Malik shouted. The shuttles launched from the enemy ship just as plasma bolts streaked through the void. The Resolute Dawn dropped its cloak and powered up its shields. Commander Holt gripped the armrest of her chair. "Open fire!" she commanded. The first salvo from the human ship tore through space like lightning. 2 Koth cruisers exploded instantly, caught off guard by the sudden attack. The remaining ships scrambled into formation, firing in all directions. The Resolute Dawn spun through the chaos, its railguns cutting through armor as if it were paper. The rescued Thraxan watched from the medical bay, unable to understand how a single ship dared to face an entire fleet. But that was humanity. Reckless, fearless, unstoppable when driven by purpose. The Koth admiral roared in fury. "One ship dares challenge the Dominion? Crush them!" His cruisers surrounded the Resolute Dawn, unleashing a storm of plasma fire. The ship's shields flickered, alarms blared, and sparks flew across the bridge. Holt stayed calm. "Bring the pulse cannons online," she ordered. "Pulse cannons? That's a restricted weapon," Vega shouted. "Not today," Holt said. The pulse cannons were a Terran invention, energy weapons designed for short-range annihilation. They were banned under galactic law because they caused gravitational disturbances that could tear smaller ships apart. The crew fired them anyway. A blinding white wave burst from the Resolute Dawn, slicing through the nearest enemy cruiser. The explosion was so intense that even distant asteroids cracked under the pressure. The Koth fleet hesitated, shocked. In that second of confusion, the humans struck again. One by one, the enemy ships fell. Some tried to retreat, but their drives were disabled by the human swarm drones. Small, intelligent machines that latched onto enemy hulls and disrupted their power systems. Within minutes, the once invincible Koth armada was in disarray. Commander Holt could see their formation breaking apart on the tactical screen. "Message from the Koth flagship," Vega said. "They're demanding our surrender." Holt almost laughed. "Transmit this message back," she said. "This is Terran space now. Leave or be erased." Her voice carried across open frequencies, reaching every Koth channel. For the first time in the battle, the Koth hesitated. They weren't used to being defied. They weren't used to fear. But that's exactly what they felt when they heard the calm, steady voice of a Deathworlder who had no intention of backing down. When the last of the Koth ships jumped into hyperspace, fleeing the system, the crew of the Resolute Dawn finally exhaled. The bridge was filled with smoke and flickering lights. Hull breaches were sealed, weapons overheated, and energy reserves nearly gone. But they had won. The Thraxan survivors aboard the ship wept. Some fell to their knees, whispering prayers. Commander Holt looked at them quietly, then said to her crew, "We're not done yet. We came to help, and help means rebuilding." And so, instead of leaving, the Deathworlders stayed. They began repairing what they could, restoring satellites, clearing wreckage, and helping the Thraxan set up new shelters on the surface. They didn't ask for reward or recognition. They simply worked side by side with the survivors, teaching them how to defend themselves. In the ruins of a shattered world, hope began to flicker again. The Thraxan had believed the stars were silent, that no one would answer their call. But now they knew the truth. Somewhere out there, among the endless darkness, there were beings who still listened, beings who would cross any distance to help. The humans didn't stay for glory or thanks. They stayed because it was the right thing to do. And from that moment on, the name Deathworlder no longer meant something to fear. For the Thraxan, it meant salvation. The silence after the battle did not last long. The Resolute Dawn floated above the Thraxan homeworld, its hull scorched and engines flickering from the fight. Inside, the crew was repairing systems and treating the wounded. The air smelled of smoke, oil, and ozone. Everyone was tired, but no one dared to rest. They knew the Koth would return. Empires like the Koth never accepted defeat. Commander Era Holt stood by the observation window, staring at the shattered moon. The reflection of explosion still glimmered on its surface. "They'll come back," she said quietly. Lieutenant Vega nodded. "And next time they'll bring the full fleet." The Thraxan survivors had gathered in one of the ship's cargo bays, which the humans had turned into a temporary shelter. Children huddled together, whispering in fear. Adults tried to stay calm, but their eyes showed deep sadness. Their world had been destroyed, their people scattered. Even though the humans had saved them, the trauma was still fresh. Holt walked among them, offering a few soft words through the translator. "You are safe now. We'll protect you." But even she wasn't sure how long they could keep that promise. Back on the bridge, reports arrived from the outer sensors. The Koth fleet was regrouping. They had sent a massive signal to their command base, calling for reinforcements. The Deathworlders knew what that meant. Within hours, another fleet would jump into the system, bigger, stronger, and ready for revenge. Commander Holt gathered her officers in the strategy room. The holographic map of the system glowed in blue light. Red dots marked the incoming enemy. "We can't fight them head-on this time," Vega said. "They'll outnumber us 20-1. Holt crossed her arms. "Then we don't fight them head-on. We fight like Deathworlders," the crew understood. Humans had survived their own world, a planet full of hurricanes, volcanoes, and predators. They had learned to use intelligence and chaos as weapons. If the Koth believed numbers alone could win, they were about to learn how wrong that was. Holt called for the ship's AI, an old Terran program named Athena. "Run a full tactical simulation," she said. "Show me every asteroid, every debris field, every gravitational pocket in the system." The hologram changed. The map became a maze of drifting rocks and broken satellites. Holt smiled. "Good. We'll turn this system into a trap. For hours, the crew worked. Engineers reprogrammed drones, turning them into mines and decoys. Mechanics modified gravity torpedoes, powerful weapons that could twist space itself, crushing ships from the inside. Every spare piece of metal was converted into something deadly. In the medical bay, Sergeant Malik helped the Thraxan build emergency shelters on the surface. He showed them how to dig reinforced tunnels and use energy barriers for protection. The Thraxan watched in awe. They had never built anything for war before. One young Thraxan named Lyra followed Malik everywhere, asking questions. "Why do you fight?" she asked in her soft, musical voice. Malik smiled sadly. "Because if we don't, someone else will take what's left of us. That's how humans survived. We learn to stand even when it hurts." Meanwhile, the Resolute Dawn's sensors picked up new signals. The Koth reinforcements had arrived, an entire war armada. Over 300 ships filled the sky, forming a line that stretched across space like a wall of fire. Their flagship, the Oblivion Spear, was 10 times the size of the human vessel. Inside the Koth command deck, Admiral Vorak Tool's rage burned like a furnace. The humiliation of losing to one small human ship had spread through his ranks. Now he wanted blood. "Find them," he roared. "Erase them from existence. Leave nothing alive." The human crew watched as the massive fleet approached. Vega turned to Holt. "They're scanning for us." "Let them," Holt said. "I want them to think we're hiding." She ordered the ship to power down most systems, pretending to be damaged. In reality, they were waiting. Hundreds of hidden drones floated in the debris field, silent and still, waiting for Holt's command. The Koth ships advanced, confident and proud. Their scanners swept the area, locking onto the faint signal of the Resolute Dawn. The Admiral grinned. "There they are. Open fire." A rain of plasma bolts filled the void. Explosions tore through nearby asteroids. The Resolute Dawn seemed to vanish in the storm. The Koth Admiral laughed, until the first explosion ripped through his own fleet. Holt's trap had sprung. The debris field wasn't random. It was a minefield. Each piece of metal contained microgravity warheads triggered remotely. The moment the Koth fired, they disturbed the field. The mines detonated in perfect sequence. Entire squadrons disappeared in flashes of light. "Fire the gravity torpedoes," Holt shouted. 2 glowing projectiles launched from the Resolute Dawn. They didn't explode. Instead, they bent space itself, pulling nearby ships into invisible whirlpools of destruction. Hulls cracked, engines tore apart, and fragments spiraled away into the void. Within minutes, the enemy's tight formation was broken. But the Koth were not weak. They regrouped quickly, firing back with fury. One plasma bolt struck the Resolute Dawn, shaking it violently. Consoles burst in sparks and alarms screamed through the corridors. Shields down to 30%. Vega yelled, "Hold the line!" Holt replied, "Keep them focused on us." The plan was working, barely. While the Koth concentrated on the Resolute Dawn, human drones infiltrated their ships. These were no ordinary machines. Built with adaptive AI, they attached themselves to enemy hulls and hacked into control systems. One by one, the Koth ships began to malfunction. Weapons turned off, engines froze, and navigation systems went dark. But the battle came at a cost. Inside the ship, several compartments were on fire. Crew members rushed with extinguishers, sealing off damaged sections. In the med bay, Dr. Wren worked tirelessly, his hands covered in blood. "We can't keep this up forever," he muttered. Holt knew it too. Every second they stayed, the risk grew. But she couldn't stop, not yet. Not until the Thraxan were truly safe. The Koth Admiral, furious and desperate, decided to unleash his final weapon, a planet-killer cannon. It was designed to destroy entire worlds with one blast. As it charged, a crimson glow surrounded the flagship. "End this!" Vorak roared. Vega's face went pale. "They're going to fire on the planet." Holt's voice turned sharp. "Target their cannon. Full power. No mercy." The Resolute Dawn's main railgun rotated, locking onto the flagship. Every remaining ounce of energy was redirected to the weapon. Lights flickered. Systems shut down. The ship itself groaned under the pressure. "Ready," Vega said, sweat dripping down her forehead. "Fire," Holt whispered. The shot tore through space like a spear of white fire. It struck the flagship dead center. For one brief moment, the massive vessel glowed like a second sun. Then it shattered. The explosion rippled outward, consuming nearby ships and scattering debris for miles. The shockwave hit the Resolute Dawn, throwing it off course. The crew was thrown from their seats. Sparks rained from the ceiling. But when the light faded, only silence remained. The Koth fleet was gone. Minutes passed before anyone spoke. Then Vega looked up from her console. "They're all gone," she said softly. "Every last one of them." Commander Holt leaned back, exhausted. Her uniform was torn, her face streaked with ash.
"Status of the planet?"
"The Thraxan are safe. No major hits." A long silence filled the bridge. Then Holt exhaled slowly. "Then we did it." Outside, the space around Thraxan glowed with drifting remains of the battle. Twisted metal, shattered ships, and burning fragments slowly fading into darkness. The cost had been high, but the system was free. Down on the planet, the Thraxan emerged from their shelters and looked up at the sky. They saw the wreckage burning in orbit and understood what had happened. The humans had done what no one else in the galaxy had dared to do. They had faced the Koth Dominion and won. That night, the Thraxan held a silent ceremony. They placed glowing crystals into the ground, one for each life lost, both Thraxan and human. When the final crystal was placed, the valley shimmered like a sea of stars. Commander Holt stood beside Rylith, watching the lights. "You don't need to thank us," she said softly. "Just promise me something." Rylith turned to her. "Anything. Promise you'll never send another SOS without preparing to fight back." Rylith nodded slowly. "We will remember." The Resolute Dawn remained in orbit for several days, helping rebuild and gather the scattered survivors. The humans didn't speak much about their victory. They didn't boast. They simply worked quietly, fixing what they could as if destroying an enemy fleet had been just another day's duty. But word of what happened spread faster than light. Across the galaxy, whispers began. About the humans from the Deathworld who answered an alien cry for help and erased an entire armada. Some called them saviors. Others called them monsters. Commander Holt didn't care what anyone called them. She looked out into the stars, her eyes tired but proud. Humanity had shown what it meant to answer a call, not with words but with action. And as long as there were cries for help in the dark, she knew Deathworlders would always answer. When the last Koth ship vanished into dust and silence, the stars above Thraxan seemed to grow calm again. The endless roar of battle was gone, replaced by the soft hum of the Resolute Dawn's engines as they drifted through the wreckage. The crew moved slowly, their faces tired but filled with quiet pride. They had survived what should have been impossible. The Koth Dominion's mighty fleet was gone, erased in a storm of light and fury. Inside the ship, everything smelled of smoke and metal. The corridors were littered with burnt panels and emergency lights flickered like candles. Mechanics were already at work, sealing hull cracks and repairing power lines. Some of the crew limped through the halls, their uniforms torn, their bodies bruised, but no one complained. They had done what they came to do, save lives. Commander Ira Holt stood on the bridge, staring at the wreckage that floated outside. Her reflection in the glass looked older, wearier. She had seen death before, but never on this scale. Around her, the holographic display showed the battlefield, thousands of twisted metal fragments drifting in orbit, the silent graves of the Koth. Lieutenant Vega approached her quietly. "Damage reports ready," she said. "We've lost 2 engine cores, half the drones, and the pulse cannons are burnt out. But we're alive." Holt gave a faint smile. "Alive is good enough." She turned toward the main screen. "Send a message to the Thraxan. Tell them it's over." On the surface below, the message spread quickly. The Thraxan came out of their shelters and caves, blinking up at the light of day for the first time since the attack began. The sky was still scarred. Trails of fire and dust streaked across it. But now, for once, it was quiet. The nightmare was over. The Thraxan gathered in their ruined cities, helping each other rebuild. The humans sent shuttles filled with food, medicine, and engineers to assist them. Every landing was met with tears and gratitude. For the Thraxan, it was hard to believe that beings from another world had risked everything for them. One small Thraxan child saw the humans working near the remains of a burned temple. She tugged at her mother's arm and whispered, "Are they gods?" Her mother smiled weakly and shook her head. "No, child. They are Deathworlders, and they are far greater than gods." On the Resolute Dawn, the crew gathered in the mess hall, sharing a rare quiet meal together. No one cheered or celebrated. They simply sat exhausted. Commander Holt entered the room, her uniform still marked with soot. The crew stood at attention, but she waved them down. "Sit," she said. "You've earned it." She looked around the table at her people, soldiers, engineers, medics, all of them hardened by countless battles. Yet in their eyes there was something softer this time. "I know what you're thinking," she began. "We broke laws. We defied the council. We went against every rule they set." She paused, then added, "And I'd do it again." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Sergeant Malik grinned. "Next time, maybe we'll ask permission first." Laughter rippled through the room, light and tired but real. Outside, the work continued. The Thraxan engineers, with human help, began rebuilding their energy grid. The planet's once shining crystal towers were gone, but with Terran technology they started to rise again. Stronger this time, reinforced with steel and defense shields. The humans also helped set up orbital defenses, teaching the Thraxan how to use automated cannons and drone fighters. It was strange for the Thraxan. For centuries they had lived in peace, believing that violence only created more pain. Now, under human guidance, they were learning to fight back, not for conquest but for survival. "We never wanted to be warriors," Raelith, the Thraxan elder, said to Holt one evening as they stood near the repaired communication tower. "Neither did we," Holt replied softly. "But sometimes peace must be protected by those willing to stand for it." The next day, the Galactic Council finally responded. Their message was cold and official. "Unauthorized engagement detected. You are ordered to withdraw from Thraxan space immediately and submit to review." Vega read the message out loud, then looked up at Holt. "What should I say?" Holt's expression didn't change. "Nothing. You want me to ignore the council? I want you to remind them that while they were debating, people were dying. We didn't ask for permission to do what was right." For a moment, Vega hesitated. Then she smiled and nodded. "Yes, Commander." In the following days, small rescue ships from other worlds began arriving, drawn by the Thraxans' new beacon signal. They came expecting to find ruins, but instead they found hope, and a story spreading across the stars. Word traveled quickly. A human fleet had answered a call for help that no one else dared to answer. The story of the erased Koth Armada became legend almost overnight. Across the galaxy, reactions were mixed. Some races praised the humans, calling them heroes who brought justice to the forgotten. Others whispered that they were dangerous, unpredictable beings who used weapons that should never have existed. The Galactic Council called for investigation, but none of the witnesses wanted to testify against the Deathworlders. Meanwhile, the Resolute Dawn crew worked side by side with the Thraxan, cleaning the last traces of battle from orbit. Every day they pulled more survivors from wreckage, more fragments of the old Thraxan world. Children began laughing again. Music returned to the streets, played on instruments that somehow survived the destruction. But even amid the quiet rebuilding, the shadow of loss remained. Many Thraxan had died, and their memory hung heavy in the air. The humans helped build a memorial on the surface, a vast crystal monument shaped like two hands reaching for each other, one human and one Thraxan. Inside it, every name of the fallen was engraved in light. On the day of its completion, both races gathered for the ceremony. Holt stood beside Raelith at the center. The Thraxan elder lifted his staff and spoke. "When the darkness came, we called into the stars, not knowing who would listen. We expected silence, but the Deathworlders heard us. They did not come to conquer. They came to stand beside us. We owe them not just our lives, but our hope." The crowd fell silent as Commander Holt stepped forward. She didn't give a grand speech. Her voice was quiet but clear. "We didn't save you because we're heroes. We saved you because that's what we were meant to do. When someone calls for help, you answer. That's what makes you more than a soldier. That's what makes you human." Her words echoed through the valley. The Thraxan bowed their heads, their luminous eyes shining like stars. That night, Holt walked alone near the edge of a cliff overlooking the rebuilt city. The wind was cool, carrying the faint music of Thraxan instruments. Vega joined her, holding a small data pad. "We've finished uploading the last survivor reports," she said. "They want to name the city after you, Holt's Haven." Holt shook her head. "No, name it something that belongs to them." "They earned it." Vega smiled softly. "You'll never let yourself take credit, will you?" Credit doesn't matter, Holt said. What matters is they can live without fear again. For a while, neither of them spoke. They just watched the glowing towers rise against the dark horizon. Then Vega asked, "What now?" Holt looked up at the stars. "Now we go home and wait for the next call." Before they left, Raylith came to see her one last time. He carried a small crystal sphere that shimmered with light. "A gift," he said. "It contains our song of remembrance, so that wherever you go you will carry a piece of Thraxan with you." Holt took the crystal gently, touched by the gesture. "I'll keep it safe," she promised. As the resolute Dawn prepared for departure, the Thraxan gathered to watch the humans leave. The ship rose slowly into the sky, engines glowing blue, leaving trails of light across the atmosphere. The Thraxan sang their farewell, their voices soft and haunting. From orbit, Holt could see the planet below, shining faintly beneath the stars. "Set course for home," she said quietly. As the stars stretched into streaks of light, she closed her hand around the glowing crystal. A single thought passed through her mind, not of victory but of responsibility. The galaxy was full of forgotten voices, crying out just like the Thraxan once did. And if no one else would listen, the Deathworlders would. They didn't fight for glory or fame. They fought because they remembered what it felt like to be alone, to scream into the void and hear nothing back. Now, they were the answer. The light in the dark, the ones who came when no one else would. And somewhere far behind them, a small world rebuilt itself under a sky finally free of war, whispering a single promise into the stars. We remember who answered. Years passed after the Battle of Thraxan, but the story never truly faded. It spread from one world to another like a spark carried by the solar winds. Traders, explorers, and wanderers told the tale in quiet corners of alien markets and crowded docking stations. Everyone knew the story of the Deathworlders who answered an SOS that no one else dared to. Some spoke of it as a legend. Others whispered it like a warning. But no matter how it was told, one truth remained the same. When humans arrived, the impossible happened. On Earth, the event was classified at first. The Terran Council didn't want too much attention. They feared that the story might make humanity look like warmongers again, the same image they had spent years trying to soften. But it was too late. The footage from the Resolute Dawn had already escaped into the Galactic network. Videos showed human ships diving through enemy fire, drones swarming like storms, and the Koth fleet burning in bright silence. It looked unreal, like something from a myth, yet everyone knew it was real. The Galactic Council held emergency meetings for weeks. Some members argued that humans had gone too far. They violated engagement laws. One alien representative shouted during a broadcast, "They used weapons that no species should possess." Others defended them. "Would you rather they had done nothing?" Another replied, "The Thraxan would be extinct without them." And somewhere in that endless argument, the galaxy changed. The Thraxan, once a small and peaceful species, became a symbol of survival. They rebuilt their world under the guidance of human engineers and began sending ambassadors across the stars. They carried with them a message of unity and courage, always ending their speeches with the same words. When no one else came, the Deathworlders answered. On their rebuilt capital world, a signal beacon pulsed in orbit, the same one that had once sent the original SOS. But now it transmitted something new. A repeating binary code. We remember who answered. It became the most famous transmission in the galaxy. Commander Era Holt had returned to Earth long before the story became legend. She avoided politics and fame, living quietly near the coast of an old Terran colony world. Sometimes reporters came looking for her, hoping for interviews or quotes. She refused them all. She didn't see herself as a hero. She just saw the faces of those she couldn't save, human and Thraxan alike. But her crew didn't forget her. Neither did the Thraxan. Once every year, a small delegation came to visit her home. They brought her gifts: crystal carvings, fragments of rebuilt towers, messages from children who had grown up hearing her name. And each year, Holt would smile and thank them, though her eyes always carried that same deep sadness. One evening, as she sat watching the sea, her old Lieutenant Vega came to visit. The sun was setting, painting the waves in orange light. They hadn't seen each other in years. Vega still wore her fleet uniform, though now her rank badge gleamed with the mark of Admiral. Still hiding out here? Vega teased, sitting beside her. Not hiding, Holt said softly. Just letting time pass. Vega handed her a small data chip. You should see this. It's from the Thraxan archive. Holt inserted the chip into her tablet and a holographic image appeared. The new Thraxan capital. Towering spires of glass and metal reflected sunlight, and children ran through wide-open plazas. Then the image changed to the memorial they had built years ago. The two hands reaching toward each other, one human and one Thraxan. At the base, new words had been added in glowing letters, for those who answered when silence was easier. Holt's throat tightened. They rebuilt everything, she whispered. They did, Vega said. And they named their defense academy after you. Holt smiled faintly. That's too much. They don't think so. They train every cadet with one rule. Never ignore a call for help. Vega looked at her. You changed them, Era. You changed everyone. Holt looked back at the horizon, her expression calm but thoughtful. Maybe, but I think they changed us too. Elsewhere in the galaxy, other races began to take notice. The once feared Koth Dominion no longer existed, but its defeat had left a power vacuum. Many empires grew cautious of humanity. They studied Earth's history, the wars, the disasters, the resilience. They saw how humans had risen again and again from ashes, and slowly, a new term began to spread across official star charts and council records. Humans were no longer called Deathworlders by outsiders. That word had always carried fear. Now they were known by a new title, the Answerers. The name began as a whisper, then became an honor. Entire civilizations began sending out distress calls with an added line. To the Answerers, if you hear us. The humans didn't always respond, they couldn't be everywhere, but when they did, the result was always the same. They brought help, and they brought hope. Years later, Vega led her own fleet to a distant world under siege. When her ships arrived, the local inhabitants sent a message of pure relief. We hoped the Answerers would come. It was then that Vega realized what they had become. Not conquerors, not warriors, but guardians of the forgotten. Back on Earth, schools began teaching the Thraxan rescue as one of the most important moments in galactic history. Children learned about Commander Holt, about how a small human fleet changed the fate of an entire species. Some of them grew up dreaming not of glory, but of being the ones who answered the next call. Holt herself lived long enough to see this new age begin. She never returned to service, but she watched with quiet pride as new fleets were built. Not for war, but for protection. The ships bore a simple emblem, two hands clasped together, human and alien. Beneath it were the words, "We answer." One night, many years after the battle, Holt sat alone under the stars. The same crystal sphere the Thraxan elder had given her still glowed softly beside her. She activated it, and the Thraxan song of remembrance filled the air, a haunting melody that echoed like starlight. It spoke of loss and courage, of strangers who became saviors. She closed her eyes, remembering the faces of her crew, Malik, Vega, all of them laughing in the mess hall after the battle. She remembered the Thraxan child who had called them gods and the promise she made to Raleth, "We'll always answer." As she drifted into sleep, she thought about how the galaxy had changed. Entire species now worked together to protect the weak. The Galactic Council, once slow and fearful, had reformed its laws, allowing any world to send an open distress call. And humanity had become a symbol not of danger, but of hope. Far above her home, satellites still carried the pulse of the Thraxan beacon, that steady binary code repeating endlessly through space. Some said the message had become a part of the cosmic background, echoing in every communication channel. Scientists claimed they could still detect its rhythm on distant frequencies, though no one knew how far it had traveled. One day, long after Holt was gone, a small human vessel exploring the edge of another galaxy received that same pulse again. The young captain reading the translation smiled softly. It said, "We remember who answered." He turned to his crew and said, "Prepare the jump. Someone's calling again." And just like that, the story continued. One generation after another, a chain of answering hearts stretching through time. Wherever there was darkness, humans brought light. Wherever there was silence, they brought a voice. The galaxy no longer feared the word Deathworlder. It became a reminder of strength born from pain, of compassion forged through struggle, Every species that had once watched humanity with suspicion now saw them differently. Not monsters, not saviors, just beings who understood what it meant to fight for life. And though many centuries would pass, the legacy of Commander Holt and the Thraxan would never be forgotten. Their story was carved into monuments, painted on starships, and sung in alien languages across the stars. Somewhere, in the endless dark between galaxies, that small pulse of light still traveled, the eternal signal of gratitude, carrying one final message that echoed forever in the cosmos. We remember who answered.